Greetings. Welcome to another Partner Perspectives from Infinite Green. You've got Scott McIntyre connecting from Colorado Springs. We've got Valerie Rodriguez connecting from Las Vegas. And our special guest today is Michael Cibelli from PolyAI. He's based in Naples, Florida, I believe. So welcome, Michael.
Thanks.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about AI and some automation and a pretty compelling capability with PolyAI. And how they go to market with some specific IVR experiences, kind of front end experiences for your customers. And we're just going to kick it off a little bit about the market first. Michael, what are you seeing in the market today regarding AI, and where does Poly play a key role in that?
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. Always fun to be with the Infinite Green family and talking about CX and AI. I mean, what could be better? So great way to start the day. Thanks for having me. What we're seeing is you can't take many steps without hearing somebody talk about it, first off. And then there are those that are looking at it in different ways. Some are jumping in, but I find most want to kind of test the waters, right? So how do we make them feel comfortable with what we're trying to do? Because it's, I think there's a fallacy out there that everyone thinks this is about replacing agents and destroying contact centers. And frankly, that's not what it is. It's a complementary piece. It's not either or, it's an and. And so we're seeing that start to be realized. And we're finding some trends in some specific industries, I would say, that are really focusing on this space because we're seeing a lot of opportunity come in around those.
Yeah. Go ahead, Valerie.
No, I was just going to kind of add on that to your point about like replacing agents. The other piece is like, there's a little bit of this like complacency to having customers be dissatisfied with their virtual AI experience, right? They're like, oh yeah, like customers don't really love it. They want to get to a human. And, I think that where kind of we, the PolyAI team and the Infinite Green team really kind of position well is that, it really is the design, not the tech. And from a customer satisfaction standpoint, there's a time and a place for everything. So to your point, like it's an and, not an or. There are times where a customer does just want to be served without having to have an interaction. And there's times where it's appropriate to be able to set up that experience to surprise and delight the customer in a different way, right? So I think like spot on for you is like we, are thinking about the agent experience, we're thinking about the operational benefits, but we're also really kind of prioritizing that right balance for the customer experience and to have a good takeaway, not a disruption because of the AI.
Yeah, I think a couple of things to add on there. I'm seeing, the lines of business really being the focus here. It's not that you're leaving IT or anything out, because if you do, that's a mistake. You get down through the process and then there's some security review that has to happen. And the next thing you know, you've elongated your sale even further because of that. So they have to be included. But a lot of the ROI analysis is really focused on how do we affect those lines of business? And in fact, this is an ROI sale. People are not making the change just for the sake of adding AI. You've got to prove out as to why you would add the AI. And I think that's something that we align with very, very well with you and your customers, that we make sure that a particular use case is going to be able to contain those calls and do things that will enable that end user to save money by doing it.
Yeah, I think those starting points are really critical, because a lot of people try to, I think, frame up like an automation strategy that includes every single call type, every single caller intent, and they don't move forward until they kind of have that all laid out in their head. And you'll never get to an endpoint because customers' needs continue to change and your top call types continue to evolve. And the systems that are used to tee up kind of transactional information are changing. So I think the coaching that we have for companies is find some easy starting points. Right. And if you've used IVR automation in the past, where it's very static and very, I would say, deep and wide in terms of design, I think the new AI tools on the market like Poly make it super easy to not have to program all of the customer steps into the process. And I think that's where the new tools really have an advantage, is you can test and try very simple experiences for very little effort up front to see how the customers navigate it, to see how they use it, measure how they use it, measure their satisfaction with it, and then evolve it. And I know, we've had this conversation offline about the evolution of using tools like this, whereas you find a great starting point, the best use case possible, you let customers use it, but then it evolves pretty quickly from there. Michael, maybe you could give some examples, maybe from the healthcare industry, about that evolution once you start within an organization.
Yeah, sure. You're absolutely right in terms of you don't start out with the most difficult use case that you can possibly find within that organization, right? We like to start out with something that would be a little more simple. I mean, it could be something as simple as FAQs, or it could be, Wizmo, or something in there that's kind of really simple to do. We've done them millions of times, and so on and so forth. So you would start there. And then what I think is really unique is how the system helps determine what you should do next, right? So for example, if somebody said, we start out in this one space, and then the next thing we do is, we think we want to do billing, right? And you go, I'm not sure that's what you want to do, because the back-end analytics that we get tell us a lot of what those calls are coming in for. I'll give you an example of one we did. This one's really good for you, Valerie, from a hospitality perspective. We had an account that's a very large restaurant brand, and we started taking reservations for them. And the reservations were actually going really, really well. And they saw a complete uptick because this was located in Las Vegas, where you are. There's a million different choices. So if someone doesn't pick up rapidly, the next thing you do is you hang up and you call somebody else. And they were realizing that they were missing those opportunities. So we put in the reservations, and those went up. What we then noticed on the back end, because something unique to us, is we put a CSR on an account to help monitor, tweak, change, because anyone who thinks you put these in, set it and forget it, is making a huge mistake. It's not how this stuff works. And what the CSR saw was a trend for 2 top tables to be the reservation point. And that restaurant chain was actually configured with 4 and 6 tops for the vast majority of the restaurant. And they came up with the idea of, if we reconfigured the restaurant with 2 top tables, how many more could you fit in there? And we started having these conversations with this restaurant group. And they're like, that's crazy. We could fit a heck of a lot more tables in here. And they actually made a change to how their restaurant was configured to drive more reservations, not just the ones that they were missing from the start, but now we could have more in that same time frame because of more tables, and drove those revenues straight up to the tune of literally millions of dollars a year in additional restaurant reservations. That's how you change how somebody does business.
Yeah. I mean, that's a super valid point, because, the intrinsic benefit of implementing any AI use case is the contextual data that you're getting around the calls or interactions that may be outside of, that specific transaction, right? I remember when I was a call center leader, like one of the biggest gaps in where I could, there's so much data in call center spaces, but one of the biggest gaps is, why are customers calling, right? And every call center is trying to tag things and trying to create, these custom ways to report on, that just basic question of what are our customers calling about, and being able to, without even having to configure anything, but being able to tap into a system and see what people are saying from their transcriptions, and being able to easily and quickly answer that question provides so much value to other areas of the business. So like what you're talking about, Michael, you're not just handling transactions, you're creating an operational benefit that's going to have outcomes outside of what you were just trying to achieve, which is reduce abandonment and, increase your reservation capture and conversion. So I think that's huge. I think just the context, not only just the data point of number of covers, but the context of what are people saying, you get regardless of how big that first implementation is. You do one implementation and you already get that.
Yeah. And, a lot of times a customer will want to put an entire outline of, well, first we're going to do this, and then we're going to move to this use case, and then this use case. And
right, because we're operators and we have to think that way.
Yeah, I know. It's fine to think that way. But what we can do is either validate that, or we can tell you, you should still do that. However, you might want to take what you were doing in phase 3 and move it to phase 2, because the ROI for that particular use case is stronger than the one that you were going to do in phase 2, right? So it helps prioritize what you should do where, and it's really great when you can drive that type of change within a business.
Yeah, I think the other unintended consequence of that is that if you have a quality and compliance team that are looking at call center processes and making sure that agents and the tools and tech are doing what they want to do, is they switch from that compliance kind of mentality to an opportunity mentality, that they can demonstrate to the company that there's additional value that can be obtained through the contact center. And that's often tough for operators to do, to Valerie's point, right? Because they're trying to hold everything together. And now this shifts their focus to, what's possible, what are the customers asking for, and how do we tack to a place that's more valuable, versus a place where you're maybe looking at reducing costs or shrinking costs, those kinds of things. So it creates kind of a value-added atmosphere, to your point, Michael.
Yeah, it's true. And it's just so freeing and such a good feeling when you're able to bring that to somebody. And it's not just, well, I'm trying to sell you this, or I'm actually changing the way that you're doing things for the betterment of the business. And that's a very different position to come in than selling you a shiny new penny because this thing's new and yours is old, and so on and so forth. This is really changing.
Yeah. And I think the position, a lot of times we hear, well, our customers don't want this automation. Our customers don't like it. And, my first response to that is, look at industry stats, look at what other companies are doing, point them to other experiences. But, they continue to push back on that. But I do think that consumers are getting used to the technology, right? I think they almost sometimes expect there to be technology sitting there. And so it's becoming, I don't think it's quite ubiquitous yet in the industry, but it's getting there.
Yeah, it's interesting. We sell globally, right? And what we find is the companies that we sell to in EMEA are more receptive, and we were trying to understand why that is. We thought about it, and really, in North America, we've been predisposed to so many poor IVR experiences over the years. And we went through that entire cycle of IVRs to where they started out, look, it was what we had. It was better than what we didn't have. But we had those experiences and lived through that. So there was an initial, oh no, not another thing relative to an IVR or something of that sort. So you got a lot of blocking from that standpoint. But once they start to hear the differences, there's more openness and more, they're more receptive to the change, right? And I think what I'd like to impress upon anyone doing this is oftentimes because of that, they'll hear a new one and they'll go, oh, that sounds really good. And it may. And in fact, many of them are starting to sound really good. But as we all know, a conversation is two ways. So the way something sounds is great. But what's really important is how something listens and responds. And by that, I mean, if someone calls in and the virtual assistant doesn't understand what is said and says, I'm sorry, I didn't get that. The first thing somebody says is, representative,
Yeah.
right? And you've lost containment of that. And so I would say, make sure that what you're looking at can really understand what is said, because that's as important, if not more important, than to how it sounds at the outset, right? And we really focus on that with multiple ASRs in that background, automated speech recognition, to strip away a lot of the noise, to really understand what was said, to help contain those calls, because that is a real key into how somebody feels about how this is. In other words, did he get it the first time? Because we all say things differently. My example would be if I said to you, "Oh, thanks for calling. What's your account number?" And Valerie, you might say ABC123. Scott, you may say Alpha Beta Charlie 123. You both said the same thing, but you said it completely different ways. I need to make sure I understand what was said, regardless of how it's said, however it came through from an accent perspective, or soft talk versus somebody who talks boldly, and be able to make that happen and really understand what was said. Those are very, very key to making these work well.
Yeah, the conversational pickups that the tools have now with the large language models, and then on top of that, the tuning you do from the industry perspective, like hospitality has a bunch of different keywords or key phrases or language that healthcare might not use, or financial services might not use, right? So each one of the industries has a little bit of unique nomenclature to it, right? And that gets applied into the tools like yours, and can really have a great conversation and really kind of narrow down the customer's need pretty quickly. And so I think that's what's different about, new tools versus the old IVR paths that you had to predefine a path. And if the customer got off that path, they'd get off it in a hurry and they'd start, getting agents involved and, zeroing out and doing all those behaviors that were unintended, but you didn't follow that narrow path. Now the path is extremely broad, and the tools can narrow it down very quickly, based on your own company's language, nomenclature, ways customers might, interact with the systems, whether it's digital or voice, whatever it is. And I think that's where investments like looking and testing Poly is very approachable today versus trying to pick a strategic partner 10 years ago to do an IVR, an IVR experiment. It was really hard to test and try, right? You're going to spend $1 million on testing your way to self-service or automation. And nowadays you could turn something up. And I mean, what's your average, once you get engaged in a project, how fast can you turn it up from, contract signing to go live?
Depending on, of course, the use case, because they can get pretty sophisticated, and with a lot of integrations. Some of them that are very, very simple, we can do within a couple of weeks. Like, that's not the major. But I will tell you, once you start to get into the back end connectivity, whatever else you're trying to do from that use case, they can take up to 12 to 16 weeks sometimes, depending on how deep. The reason being, with ours is, I often hear people say, well, I can set mine up and I can have it running in
go live. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, let's stop for a second. If you're looking for an on-brand CX experience with the voice that you want to represent your company, to make sure everything is right, to strip away all the issues, all the things that you have to do to make these things really hum, you don't do that in 5 minutes. These are not deployments that happen that fast, or frankly, you're going to get a deployment that sounds like you set it up in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like training a new agent, right? So, you're a lot of that time, I'm certain, is, testing and training the experience and making sure that it's, to your point, it's able to understand and have a strong recognition and really incorporate that intelligence aspect instead of just an automation. Like, you're not just creating if-then statements here, you're creating some intelligence and you're creating the conversational piece, just as you would with an agent who you're getting ready to answer the phone for the first time and be able to handle that use case. So, while you might train one agent. Now you're training many that can handle that same scenario across many different interactions. So it's all multiplied and amplified. But the training piece is one that I think is probably what you're talking about, is like, yeah, you can stand up the tech, but can you stand up the design and the experience? And that training piece is a critical part of it.
Yeah, and can you make sure that those words that you mentioned from a particular industry are there, and are they understood, and are they responded to properly, and all those little tweaks and changes. Scott brought up LLMs, which is a big part of our success. We've been in this since before AI was cool, okay? Our own LLM is over 8 years old. From an AI perspective, that's a darn old LLM, especially because it was purely focused on CX. So it's over 8 years of CX experiences. That really helps this work really well. Not that we don't use others, because we use a blend of them, but our own is pure CX and over that term. So when you take that and you take some of the other ones, which everyone knows and loves, and you blend those together, you get a really good experience because of that.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think, it's learned over those 8 years, what works, what doesn't work, how fast to have a conversation, how to slow down a conversation, all those little small nuances that you used to have to program, right, are in the system. You don't have to think about. All you have to do as a business, from a business use case perspective, is come up with the experience you want. And you don't have to program all of those alternative paths, right? That you used to. You used to have to think of every one of those intents, and then all of the ways that customers could say it. Well, the LLM is going to figure most of that out. And so all you're doing is tuning and directing, right?
Exactly.
With the tools. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, Michael, tools within PolyAI and how they help someone do that once they stand up a test experience, if you will.
Yeah, sure. So a couple things in terms of the uniqueness of how we deploy. We put a team on this, and so there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. And as I told you, we then have a CSR against the account to help pick off some things. But we actually recently came out with a tool that will allow a customer to go in and make some changes, right? So, if there was a particular word that had to make sure that it was being understood, or if there was a change on something because of a particular holiday coming up, and just some of the different things that are being done, we are allowing them to do that now, because as these progress from what was very heavy coded applications to something that is driven, more easily, and done through words rather than coding, it makes the ability there to make some simple changes yourself there. Now, for somebody that doesn't want to do that, of course, it can always be taken care of. But for those that do want that capability, Agent Studio from PolyAI will allow you to do that and make some of those changes yourself.
Well, it's kind of, yeah. I'm sorry, Scott. It's kind of that advantage that that everybody was on board with when the transition to the cloud happened, right? Like, people started to be comfortable with operations leading the way, and without having to be beholden to various IT release schedules and resources and skill sets and things like that. So that really shifted the organizational structure of a lot of companies, and where skill sets lied in the business and what roles people had. And so I think it's an important point for you to mention, Michael, is that it's really become a standard expectation of a high-level operating team to be able to, tweak the experience in certain ways, and then have more control over their test and try methodology, or just even, short-term transitions in business that need to be accommodated. And so that was really tough in the past on old tools and old technology. And as the AI tools are starting to, be more and more sophisticated, reintroducing that, I think, back to, your clients and customers and partners, I think, is a really critical value add.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'm sorry,
Right?
Scott,
Yeah.
you were going to
Think
say
of
something?
think of like product names, right? That people may or may not know how to pronounce. So those would be some of those little nuances that you're programming in. Addresses, building names, all the different things that, especially in healthcare, there's such a vast
Mhm.
nomenclature of services and drug names and other things that those are the kind of tuning elements that are needed. Whereas again, I'll compare to the past, you had to program all of that stuff in deep and wide. I mean, it might take you 6 to 12 months, right, to come up with a single experience. And so I think the flexibility that the tools have and the fact that you're not worrying about the technology, you're just worrying about what experiences you want to design. I think that has shifted significantly, and enables businesses to dream up a lot more different use cases. And to your point, the system might even show you that there's new use cases that you haven't even thought of, just like voice analytics did when that was first introduced 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, you bring up healthcare. One of them that we saw that was pretty unique that we needed to focus on is particular doctors' names.
Oh,
So if somebody calling in for Dr. Whatever, right? And the pronunciation of some last names, that's one that we really had to focus on and get right. And we continue to work with those healthcare customers that every time somebody else is added, how does that name sound? It can be pronounced various ways. Are we catching all the different ways that it's going to be said? And we'll still get it to the right person, all those types of things. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work involved in that.
yeah,
Mhm.
and again, it continues to learn, right? And so those language models can be shared with others. So I think that's
Yeah.
the other beauty of it, is you're not stuck on your own island trying to think of all these experiences, right? The system is learning and it knows this, and all you're doing is throwing in, user experiences, customer experiences that you think are valuable, and then learning from that and evolving the platform, which I think is very very cool and very modern these days. So if you haven't had a chance to experience or to experiment in this space yet, I think the group at Poly can really help you understand what valuable experiences there are in the marketplace. What are some of the standards some of the industries are using? What are some of the kind of alternative use cases that people are experimenting with, and where they're finding value? So I highly recommend reaching out to Poly or ourselves. There's a meeting link in the upper left-hand corner, right-hand corner.
Mhm.
Is it mirrored? I don't know. Your QR code up there, if you want to schedule a meeting with us. I know CCW is coming up
Yeah.
in Vegas the week of June 9th or 10th. We're going to be out there. If you have any questions or you want to meet with us out there, Valerie, maybe you can talk about some of the activity we have going on locally.
Yeah, for sure. Our team will be in Vegas, in and around the CCW event. So if you're an operator or a partner and you're interested in meeting with us, scan the barcode and there's a meet with us schedule link, and all of our availabilities on there. PolyAI and Infinite Green are also co-hosting an event on Tuesday, June 10th. So if you've made it this far and you're interested and open and available on that evening here in Las Vegas, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to send you the details. We'd love to chat with you. Just similar to our style, very informal, but informative at the same time. So we'd love to connect with you there in person, take advantage of the time where, everybody's here in Vegas together. So please reach out and we'll definitely carve out time.
Yeah, we love to talk about this. So we'd love to just sit down and have a conversation. I know Michael's the same way. We love to talk about the industry, what people are finding value in, how exciting this space is. And if you haven't started on this journey, between the three of us, we can help you get started. How to think about it, how to frame it up, what the investment models look like, where the ROI comes in, et cetera. So it's kind of exciting times when it comes to AI tools. And I know it can be very scary for a lot of different people to start kind of cracking open that egg to see what's in there. But I promise you, it's not scary. There's some cool stuff out there. And more and more customers are getting used to using this technology. And I think 5 years from now, a lot of these interactions that we have with companies are going to be assisted by tools like PolyAI.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we, of course, will be there as well. You can come see it, hear it, which is really important. Obviously, you want to hear those conversations and how they go. And we do look forward to that. But partnering with somebody like you all at Infinite Green, I think brings together the technology and then the knowledge that you have within the space, along with your customers, for us to really band together to put a little special twist on how we handle these and how we talk to customers and how we really get to what they need with your ability to consult in such a fashion. And we're happy to be a part of that. So thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
All right, that's all we have. It is at the bottom half of the hour. So thank you for your time and thanks for listening. And again, reach out to us if you want to meet up at CCW or schedule a meeting with us with the QR code, or reach out to Michael on LinkedIn, talk more about PolyAI.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.